The director walked off the set the moment shooting ended and never came back. The film that should have been the Great Escape spiritual sequel was finished by everyone except the man whose name was on it. Fact 1. Caine picked the Nazi.
Captain Clark, what can I do for you?
Michael Caine was offered the IRA role first, not the Nazi. Producers wanted him as Liam Devlin, the charming Irish revolutionary helping the German plot. Caine refused. He had no interest in playing a member of the IRA at the height of the Troubles, and he flat out told the producers so. Instead, he asked for the role of Kurt Steiner, a Nazi paratrooper colonel on a suicide mission. Think about that for a moment. A British actor born in 1933, who lived through the Blitz as a child, deliberately chose to play a Nazi over an Irish Republican. He believed Steiner was the more sympathetic character, a soldier with honor rather than a terrorist with a cause. The choice tells you everything about how Caine read the politics of 1976. Fact 2. Harris got death threats. Richard Harris was supposed to play Devlin. The Irish actor, a vocal supporter of Republican causes, had been cast in the role and was preparing for production. Then the IRA situation made him radioactive. Harris had attended an IRA fundraising event in America and made repeated public comments supporting the Republican movement. The producers started receiving threats. The film's American distributors panicked. Within weeks, Harris was off the picture. Donald Sutherland was brought in at speed, despite having no Irish heritage and no Irish accent training. The film's most charming performance was the result of casting chaos, not artistic choice. Sutherland had to invent a Devlin from scratch, and he did it inside a fortnight. He pulled it off so well that Harris's name has been almost forgotten from the story. Fact 3. Bowie almost wore black. David Bowie was announced for the film in March 1976. The New York Times reported that the rock star, fresh off The Man Who Fell to Earth, would play a German Nazi if his schedule could be arranged. It never was. Bowie's Thin White Duke phase was at its absolute peak in 1976, and he was fielding more film offers than he could handle. The role he might have taken has never been clearly identified, but the announcement sat in the Times for weeks before quietly disappearing. Imagine the film with Bowie as one of Steiner's paratroopers, or as the SS officer who menaces Rattle. The casting nearly happened. The fact that it didn't is one of the great unrecorded near misses of 70s cinema. Fact 4. Kerr walked away. Joanna Gray, the village widow secretly working for Berlin, was first offered to Deborah Kerr. The six-time Oscar nominee said no. By 1976, Kerr had retired from film and was living quietly in Switzerland. She had no interest in returning for what she considered a B-grade thriller, even with a stacked cast. Jean Marsh got the role instead and turned in one of the most chilling performances in the film, playing a woman whose entire English country life had been a 30-year cover. Kerr's refusal became Marsh's career moment. Marsh, fresh off Upstairs, Downstairs, brought a quiet, aristocratic menace to the part that no Hollywood star could have. The film is harder, colder, and more unsettling because of who said no first. Fact 5. The director wanted cash. John Sturges directed the film for one reason. He needed money for fishing. The man who made The Magnificent Seven and The Great Escape sat with Caine between takes and explained, casually, that he only worked to fund deep-sea fishing trips off Baja California. The fishing was expensive. The film's paid for it. Caine wrote about the moment in his autobiography decades later, and he was clearly still angry. The director everyone was excited to work with had quietly given up. He was going through the motions, taking the check and counting the days until he could get back to his boat. The film that was supposed to be his late-career masterpiece was, to him, a means of paying for Marlin. Fact 6. Sturges vanished after filming. The moment principal photography ended, Sturges left England and never returned. He flew to California, took the rest of his money, and didn't come back for editing, sound mixing, or any post-production work. For a director, this is unprecedented. Post-production is where most of the storytelling decisions actually happen, where pace is set, scenes are sharpened, performances are rebuilt. Sturges abandoned all of it. Producer Jack Weiner had to manage the entire post-production process without the director ever returning to give notes or watch a cut. Caine called it the worst kind of betrayal, a director who simply walked away from his own film. The Eagle Has Landed became the only major Hollywood production of the 70s effectively finished without its director. And Sturges never made another film. Over 90% of you watching this aren't subscribed, and that's how YouTube decides whether to keep showing classic film deep dives like this in your feed. Likes, comments, and watch time are the signals that tell the algorithm to serve more of these to people like you. Fact 7. A woman saved everything. Anne V. Coates was the only reason this film exists in watchable form. The editor who had won the Academy Award for Lawrence of Arabia in 1962 was handed a 145-minute rough cut and a director who had vanished. She rebuilt the film alone. Tom Mankiewicz, who wrote the screenplay, said it directly. Coates was the one who saved the movie and made it watchable. She tightened the pacing, restructured the third act, and gave the film its rhythm. The release print was 135 minutes in the UK and 123 minutes in America, both versions her work. Without Coates, the film would have been a forgotten flop. Instead, it became one of the biggest hits of 1,977. She rarely got the credit she deserved. Fact 8. The Bond writer felt robbed. Tom Mankiewicz wrote the screenplay and called it the best script he ever wrote. That's a serious claim. Mankiewicz had written Diamonds Are Forever, Live and Let Die, and The Man with the Golden Gun. His Bond work made him one of the most successful screenwriters of the 70s. He believed The Eagle Has Landed was his masterpiece. Then he watched John Sturges direct it. Mankiewicz later said Sturges had simply given up and done a poor job. The screenplay he was proudest of had been handed to a director who was already mentally on his fishing boat. Mankiewicz never publicly forgave him. The film was a hit, but for the writer it remained the great might have been of his career, the script that deserved a different director. Fact 9. Hagman hadn't met J.R. When Larry Hagman filmed his death scene as Colonel Pitts, he had no idea what was about to happen to him. Hagman was a working actor coming off I Dream of Jeannie, taking supporting parts in films like this one. His death scene is darkly comic shot in the head, dropping a grenade, rolling down a flight of stairs, and landing on the grenade just before it explodes. He played Pitts as a swaggering buffoon, the overconfident American officer who underestimates the Germans and gets his men killed. 2 years later, Hagman was cast as J.R. Ewing in Dallas, and television was never the same. By 1980, he was the most famous television villain on Earth. The Eagle Has Landed caught him in the last quiet moment of his career. Fact 10. Treat Williams was unknown. Treat Williams plays Captain Harry Clark, the competent officer who finally takes down the Germans after Hagman gets his men killed. It was Williams' fourth film. He had no profile, no following, no studio support. He had been cast through the British casting office for a few £100 a week. His next film would be Hair, Milos Forman's adaptation of the stage musical, which made him a star. After that came Prince of the City, Once Upon a Time in America, and a long career as one of the great underrated leading men. By the late 70s, he was an A-list talent. But on The Eagle Has Landed, he was a kid on his fourth job, working alongside Caine and Sutherland and trying not to embarrass himself. He didn't. Fact 11. Norfolk was actually Berkshire. Studley Constable, Norfolk doesn't exist. It never has. The fictional village in Jack Higgins' novel was filmed almost entirely at Maple Durham, a real village in Berkshire, 4 miles northwest of Reading, on the north bank of the Thames. Maple Durham House, the Elizabethan manor where the fake Churchill is shot, has been the home of the Blunt family for over 500 years. The same manor has appeared in Miss Marple, Midsummer Murders, and the Sharp television series. Mock buildings including the Spyglass and Kettle Pub and the village shop were constructed in the church car park for filming, then demolished after production wrapped. Today, the church still has a small exhibition of photographs from the shoot. The Norfolk village every viewer remembers is, geographically speaking, completely fake. Fact 12, the watermill was fake. The watermill where the German paratrooper jumps in to save the drowning girl exposing his Nazi uniform under his Polish coat is real. The water wheel turning beside it is not. Maple Durham Watermill is genuine. A 15th century building still in operation today, still grinding flour you can buy in the gift shop. But the film needed a working wheel for the rescue scene, and the original wheel had been removed centuries earlier. The production built a fake water wheel and bolted it onto the medieval structure for the duration of filming. After production wrapped, the fake wheel stayed in place. The mill has been fully restored since, with a working wheel of its own. But for years afterwards, the wheel tourists came to photograph was the prop wheel from the film. Fact 13, Black Sabbath got there first. 6 years before John Sturges filmed Maple Durham Watermill, Black Sabbath had already used it. The cover of Black Sabbath's 1970 self-titled debut album, the first heavy metal record ever released, was photographed at the same Maple Durham watermill that appears in the film. The eerie figure in black on the album sleeve stands in front of the same medieval building Caine and Sutherland would later run through. The watermill became a small obsession point for British photographers and filmmakers in the 70s, a perfect English Gothic location, isolated, weathered, and entirely without modern intrusion. Heavy metal had its origins there. 6 years later, the Nazis arrived. The same building hosts both the birth of heavy metal and the climax of one of cinema's strangest war films. Fact 14, the stuntman killed himself. Jim Dowdall is one of the most successful British stuntmen of the last 50 years, and on The Eagle Has Landed, he killed himself on screen, twice over. Dowdall was hired to play the American Jeep driver, who is shot during the village battle, crashes the vehicle into a pond, and dies. He was also hired to play the German soldier who fires the killing shot. Both costumes, same actor, he shoots himself, in effect, in the same scene. The doubling up was a cost-saving decision. Production was running tight on stunt money, but the result is one of the strangest credits in 70s action cinema. If you watch carefully, you can see the same man on both ends of the bullet. He survived both deaths. Fact 15, Finland played Germany. The opening scene, where Steiner and his men first appear at a snow-covered railway station, attempting to save a Polish refugee girl from an SS deportation, was filmed in Finland. Specifically, in Rovaniemi, the largest city in Lapland, more than 3,000 kilometers north of any place the German army actually operated against Polish refugees. The production needed authentic-looking snow at a working railway station, and the British weather wouldn't cooperate. Rovaniemi delivered. The crew flew the cast to the Arctic Circle for what amounts to less than 3 minutes of screen time. The cold was punishing. The scene that defines Steiner's character the moment he refuses to obey an SS order and saves the girl was shot in temperatures the actors could barely survive in those uniforms. Fact 16, the 1976 heat wave was real. While the train station was being filmed in Arctic conditions, the rest of the production faced the opposite problem. Britain in summer 1976 was experiencing its hottest, driest, longest summer in modern memory. Reservoirs ran dry. Crops failed. The temperature stayed above 30 degrees Celsius for weeks on end. Filming in heavy German military uniforms in sweltering rural Berkshire became a survival exercise. Caine has written about how brutal the heat was. Actors collapsing in costume, cooler trucks being driven onto set between takes, makeup melting faster than it could be reapplied. The peaceful golden countryside you see on screen, those bright bleached fields and dusty lanes, wasn't art direction. It was the worst British heat wave of the 20th century, captured by accident. Fact 17, Hitler's castle was cut. The film was originally supposed to open inside a Bavarian fairy tale castle. Hohenschwangau Castle, the 19th century Bavarian palace next to Neuschwanstein, was filmed for the opening scene. Heinrich Himmler arriving for a war conference with Hitler, Canaris, Bormann, and Goebbels. Donald Pleasance as Himmler had a major sequence with the most powerful men in the Third Reich. The entire scene was cut. What remains in the final film is the aerial shot under the opening credits, showing a staff car leaving the castle with no context for why the castle is even there. The deleted scene explains why Hohenschwangau appears in the credits but never on screen. It is the great vanish moment of the film, a complete sequence with the entire Nazi high command removed before release. Fact 18, Mission Impossible score inside. Lalo Schifrin wrote the score. The composer behind the Mission Impossible theme, Bullet, Cool Hand Luke, and Dirty Harry, brought the same musical fingerprints to The Eagle Has Landed. He used cymbalum, the Eastern European hammered dulcimer, alongside drums, strings, and brass to create a leitmotif that grows from quiet menace to full orchestral collapse. The cymbalum gives the score its strange foreign tension. It is the same instrument Schifrin had used in his earlier thrillers to suggest paranoia and pursuit. If you have ever felt the score sounds vaguely like Bullet or Dirty Harry, that is not coincidence. Schifrin built a sonic identity around that exact tension. Eagle Has Landed sits inside that identity, and it is one of the most under-discussed war film scores of the era. Fact 19, Postman claimed it was real. Jack Higgins' novel was so convincing that a retired British postman appeared on television claiming to remember the events personally. The book opens with a framed story Higgins as a fictional version of himself, finding a gravestone in a Norfolk churchyard marked with the names of 14 German paratroopers killed in November 1943. He talks to villagers. He pieces the story together. It reads like a real investigation. After the book became a bestseller in 1975, multiple British residents came forward swearing they had been there. One retired postman appeared on a national television program, in earnest, describing the battle in detail. The events he described were entirely fictional. The whole village of Studley Constable does not exist. He had read the book and convinced himself he had lived through it. Fact 20, Steiner came back. Higgins killed Steiner on the last page of the book. 8 years later, he brought him back. The Eagle Has Flown, published in 1991, picks up after the events of the original, except Steiner, who was definitively shot and killed at the manor house, somehow survives. Higgins explains it away with a single line about the bullets being very lucky not to have killed him. The sequel involves a Himmler-sponsored attempt to rescue Steiner from the Tower of London. Devlin returns. The plot is familiar territory. The book was less successful and the film adaptation never happened. But the resurrection of Steiner, a character whose entire arc was built on the price of one final mission, undid everything the original meant. The eagle that had landed was somehow still flying.